Okay, welcome to another episode of Mr. Rocks. We're going to look at a snowman scene. This set of tutorials is going to be for high school students who have never used Blender before. So we're going to create an entire scene just staying in object mode, and we're going to get used to the environment, and we're going to get used to selecting in the 3 different transforms and so forth. Let me show you the work that the students have done in this particular project before. So these are all in object mode. So this is simply using spheres for the shape of the snowman, cones for the trees, and so forth. And they're just getting used to the environment. You can see we haven't really talked about lighting yet. These are pretty bad. Actually, this person went into edit mode for that one. But you can see they're just getting used to the environment. So this is like a 45-minute assignment the very first day. They see a short demo, and then they build a snowman. Now these are the second snowman project where we go into edit mode and we start playing with things like materials and textures and change the lighting and so forth. And so we can create a much more kind of expressive scene. This is actually a blowtorch that a student made in Blender, and then this is one snowman that seems to be attacking another one. In any case, these are all actual projects in just the second project. So you can see what a big difference there is between creating a snowman project in just object mode versus in edit mode with changing the lighting and changing the textures and materials, and you can create a more interesting kind of descriptive scene. In any case, these are all students' first times. The lighting's pretty weak on this one, so we'd go back and work on the lighting. Some of them were fairly comical, and I had the kids take a picture of their scene and then turn it into Google Docs, and they just upload these onto all the same Google Doc. This snowman looks suspiciously like a dolphin, but the student who just sat down and wanted to play. And okay, so first time in Blender, we're going to go ahead and take a look at what the default scene opens up with. First of all, I want to pay attention to the fact that I have 3 axes. This is 3D software. You can see down here this little map. Z is blue up and down, then we have the X and the Y axis in red and green, and so we can see those same things make here. I'm going to call this thing the gizmo. Right down here, this is the timeline. Right above the timeline, I can turn the gizmo off and on. The gizmo is used for transformations. There's 3 transformations in Blender that are going to be used in everything that we do. They are G for grab, R for rotate, and S for scale. And I can use this gizmo to grab just on one of the 3 axes. So I've got my red axis X, my green axis is Y, and my blue axis is Z. And I can also do the same thing by just hitting G. G for grab, if I just hit G, I can move that around anywhere I want. If I hit G and then Z, it just moves on the Z axis and so forth. If I hit G and Y, it'll only move on the Y axis. So the first transformation is grab, actually translate, but we'll just go ahead and shorten that to grab. The next one is rotate, so I can go to my gizmo and I can turn that into the rotation button, and I can use that to rotate things. So I'll go ahead and rotate just on the green axis Y or just on the blue axis Z. Or I can do the same thing by just hitting R for rotate and then let's say Y, and now it'll just rotate on the Y. So I can rotate, grab, or scale by using the gizmo or just by typing in these letters. Again, it was S for scale. So every object has an origin. I'm going to turn this guy off for just a second. The origin is this little dot right here. And so in object mode, every object has one origin. And if I move my mouse away from the origin a little bit and hit S for scale, if I move my mouse away from the origin, it enlarges my cube, and if I move it towards, it scales it down. So that's scale, S for scale, and of course you can also scale on a single axis. If I hit S, Z, now I'm only scaling on the Z axis. Okay, so that is just getting started. To make my snowman scene, I'm going to hit the delete button, and I'm going to delete my cube because I'm going to want to come over here to the tools panel, go into create, and I'm going to choose a sphere. Now the thing is, I didn't see the sphere show up because the sphere goes to this thing called a 3D cursor. Every time I left click, the 3D cursor moves, and so it's going to be really helpful if I remember this shortcut, Shift S, and I can go, this little menu pops up, Shift S, and I go cursor to center, and then I can take my selection, hit Shift S again, and say selection to cursor. I think I want to put in the other kind of sphere, so I'm going to delete that guy, and I'll put in a UV sphere, and it goes right to the cursor. To duplicate something, These are pretty easy to remember. You don't have to memorize a lot in Blender, and the ones that you have to memorize are pretty easy to remember. I think I'll turn my gizmo back on and choose grab, and I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and then hit Z, and now it will just move up the Z axis, and I can scale that down a bit, and so I've got the second ball in my snowman. If I hit Shift D again and Z, I'm going to go ahead and move that guy up, and I scale it down, and now that's how quickly I can make a snowman. How do we make a hat? Well, I think I'll move my 3D cursor over here, and I will choose a cylinder. Now obviously that's a little bit big, but we'll go ahead and build the hat first and then worry about what it looks like. Sometimes things get in your way. If you want to move this guy, you can. You can just hit M to move it to another layer, and now my light is out of the way. In any case, let's build a hat. I think what I will do is simply Shift D, duplicate this guy, bring him down a little bit on the Z axis. I'm going to scale him up. Whoops, I hit Z. I'm going to scale him up, and then I'll scale him only on the Z axis. And so now this guy is looking like a hat. But notice he's two different objects. If I select by right-clicking each one of these, I'm only selecting one at a time. If I want to select two things at a time, I hit the Shift key, then select this guy, Shift select this guy, and now I can hit Control J to join, and now notice I have one origin, and that's just one single hat. So let's go ahead and move him to the top of the snowman here. I'm going to select that, I'm going to say Shift S, cursor to selected this time, and now I'll select this, and I'll say Shift S again, and I'll say selection to cursor. Probably a little bit big for this snowman, so I'll go ahead and scale him down, move him up. Maybe I'll scale him just on the Z axis, and that's looking pretty good. I don't know what kind of hat I want, but let's go ahead and leave that hat just like that. Okay, now we want to make a nose. The cursor is already at the head. Let's go ahead and move him off for a second. If I click over here, the cursor moves, so I'll go ahead and say Shift S, cursor to selected, and then I'll come over here and say cone. I'll put a cone right there. I want to rotate that guy just on the X-axis, so I'll say rotate X 90 degrees, and now it's pointing in the same right direction, but it's not the right shape. So I'm going to scale him way, 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 way down, and then I'm going to scale him out only on, let's see, I'm going to change this to global. So now I see I'm on my Y-axis. I'm going to scale him only on the Y-axis. So I say scale, Y, and now he's going to scale out a little bit that way. Okay, so now I'll probably scale the whole thing down again. It's got basically the right shape, and I can put him in there, and that's looking pretty good. Kind of a big nose. You can shrink it down if we want, but it's okay. You can make it any size you want. Okay, good. So now I want to put in an eye. So I think I'll do another sphere, and all I have to do is shrink him down a lot and move him out here. And I think what I'll do is get the eye set up just the way I want him, and then I'm going to color him, because I'm going to have a lot of different dots. So let's talk about color. To add color to your scene, you need to come over to this button. There's one that looks like the Earth and one that looks like Mars. So Earth is for the sky, and I can put in a different sky. This one is for materials, and the one that looks like Mars is for materials, and I can put in some sort of dark color. And so now that eye is going to be dark. The reason I did that, down here I see that I'm in object mode for this entire project. I'll stay there, but I want to see rendered viewing. And so now I can see that my eye is in fact black. So now I will go ahead and go back to solid, and I can simply change that. The mouse wheel moving in, if I hold the mouse down I can pivot. If I shift and then hold the mouse down I can go back and forth, but I'm just zooming in right now by hitting the mouse, and I want to shrink this down I think a little bit. Maybe I'll bring him out a little bit more this way. And so now I just want to duplicate him. I'll say Shift D and move him over on the X-axis. So that's good. And I'll say Shift D, and on the Z-axis I'll just bring him down. Maybe I'll shrink this guy down a bit more. And I'll say Shift D, and Shift D. It's probably a good idea to look at it from the side to make sure those are all looking pretty good. It looks like they can all come in a bit. So let's grab him in and grab him, pull him in a little bit. Gizmo's really handy for moving things around and staying kind of in line. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what he looks like. Actually, let's make the nose orange. I select the nose, and then I come over to a new color, and I can change that to orange. And let's bump this up a little bit and move this over here. So now I'm going to have an orange nose, and let's make it a dark green hat. So I'm going to choose this and then just come down and drop that down quite a bit. So now I have a dark green hat. And if I go back to rendered mode, this is what my snowman looks like right now. Now there's not light in here because I had moved my light out. I think I'll go ahead and move my light back in. And so if I come back over here to solid and I see where I click on the layer where my light was, select my light, I'm going to hit M again to have the layer menu pop up, and I'll move it back here. Now if I go back to that layer, I will see my light. So if I come back into rendered mode now, I should see more light. Good, and I do. If I want to change that, I can simply grab my light. If I have the light selected, this will show up, and I can change the intensity. This is a sunlight, so 3 is way too high, but maybe I'll go back down to 2, and so I can see some lighting. If you don't want to see these little facets in your shapes, you can go back to your Tools menu, and you can say, let's see, you need to select that shape and say Smooth Shading, and so now that will make it appear smooth in the render, which looks a little bit nicer in most cases. Let's go ahead and make some arms and a tree, and then we'll be done. To make the arms, I'm going to go back into solid mode, and I'm going to move the cursor someplace. I'll go ahead and add a cylinder, and the cylinder in this case, it needs to be much different shape. And so I'm going to scale it down until it gets about the right diameter, and then I'm going to say scale only on the Z-axis. And so remember, we're only in object mode using these transforms. If I say Shift D X and scale this guy on the Z-axis, I can make a finger. Shift D X again. Oops, yeah, I've got another finger. Let's see, I can move that on the X-axis. And so now I'll just come up here and I'll rotate these guys on the Y-axis. So that guy is getting rotated like that, and this guy is going to get rotated like that. And so now I just move them into place, and I've got a hand. I'm going to join all these, and so remember what we do, we shift select. I'm holding the shift key down, and I've selected all 3, and so now I hit Control J. That's a single object with a single origin, and if I say Shift D X, these guys are ready to go. So let's select both of those, and let's just move them into position where I want them to be, or where I think they might want to be. And I can see they're way too big, so I'll scale those guys down, and now I'll move them one at a time. So let's move this guy into position right into the body, and I will rotate him on the Y-axis. They're going to rotate around the origin. You can change the position of the origin. We'll learn how to do that later. So rotate on the Y, and now this guy, I can move him back into place here, and I can actually, you know what, probably an easier way to do it would be simply to select this guy, say Shift S, and say cursor to selected, and now I select this guy and say Shift S and say selection to cursor. Now this guy is in place, he's in roughly the right spot. We'll rotate on the green axis, that's Y, and I'll go ahead and move that up. And so now I have a snowman. Last thing I'm going to do is build a quick tree. I'm going to use a cone, and the cone's an easy way to do this. So I just make one cone, and I say Shift D Z, so it comes down on the Z axis, and I scale it larger. I say Shift D, move it on the Z axis, and I'm going to scale it larger. Now I would suggest that you don't include the trunk at this point, because we're just going to stay in object mode, and the objects are just going to be one color right now. We can change that when we get into edit mode. But if I want to go in here now and add a cylinder, and I say I scale that on the Z axis, and I scale the whole thing, whoops, I scale the whole thing down, I get a trunk. Scale that a little bit more on the Z. And so now these guys can be different colors, but I want them to stick together. So what I can do is take this guy, and this guy, and say Control J to join, and I'll take that top half, and instead of saying Control G, I say get that guy and that guy. And what I'm going to say here is Control P to parent, keep the offset, and so now this top guy can move anywhere I want. But notice it has that little dotted line. It turns out if I take this guy and move him, the tree is parented, the top of the tree is parented to the trunk, so they will stay together. So at this point, I think I will simply move my tree over here. I can add some color to that in a moment. I'll say Shift D. Whoops. Take the whole thing, say Shift D, and now I have two trees. Let's go ahead and scale him down quite a bit. And so I have two trees. Let's take this guy. I'm going to add a green color, so kind of like what I had before, a little bit darker, a little bit lighter than the hat rather. And so now this guy, once I've got that color inside my little menu here, I'll see it down here. It'd be a good idea if I gave this color a name. So let's say tree color. And this could be, I can name this guy, I can name him hat color. Just go in here and say hat. So you can name your colors and you can refer to them later. And so let's see what my scene looks like now. If I come in and say rendered, I've got a nice little happy snowman scene, and you can add color to other places. You could add rocks. I can make the arms brown, the trunks brown, and so forth. But I think the last thing I want to do is point out that when you do this, you can look right through the camera. If you select the camera, and then you go to number pad 0, that allows you to look through the camera, the scene you're going to create, and if I G to grab that, I can move that around. And if I hit F12, I'm going to paint a little picture here, and this one is going to go probably in about 30 seconds. In any case, that's how we're going to create our first scene. After this guy gets done rendering, then you're going to come down here to image, and you're going to say save as image. Has to be done rendering. Save as image, F3, and then you can find out where you want it to be on your home drive, and that will complete project 1. So that's it for today. Bye-bye.